morning and welcome. My name is David Huxall, President of the Fairfax Resolves chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution and your Master of Ceremonies for today's event. I want to welcome all of you and thank you all for being here today to commemorate with us a significant event in our nation's founding. That event is reflected in our chapter's namesake, and we're proud today to honor and celebrate the 248th anniversary of the adoption and signing of the Fairfax Resolves on July 18, 1774. Additionally, we will also dedicate plaques to honor the 4 of the 25 signers of the Fairfax Resolves. They are interned here at Pohick Cemetery. I'm happy once again to be conducting a fully live ceremony and would like to extend my thanks to Reverend Dr. Lynn Rinaldi, Rector of Historic Pohick Episcopal Church, and her staff for their great support. I'd like first to extend a warm welcome to our special guest, Ernie Coggins, first Vice President of the Virginia Society, the Sons of the American Revolution. Larry McKinley, past President of Virginia Society, Sons of the American Revolution. And Mike Wiley, Governor, Virginia Society, Order of Founders and Patriots of America. Thank you for joining us today. I will now call on the Reverend Tom Costa, serving today as the Reverend Lee Massey, one of the signers of the Fairfax Resolves, to lead us in our invocation. Please rise and remain standing for the posting of the colors, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the SAR pledge.
Let us pray. O Heavenly Father, we are gathered here today to commemorate the signing of the Fairfax Resolves. We ask your blessing on this remembrance, so that we and those who come after us will be ever reminded of life, liberty, freedom, and honor, and that we may be ever grateful to you and to all patriots and veterans who gave so much for their country. Grant, we beseech thee, that we and all the people of this land may have the grace to maintain these liberties in righteousness and in peace, and grant us your continued fellowship in divine providence, now and forever. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Costa. The colors will now be presented by the Combined Color Guard from the Virginia Society, Sons of the American Revolution. Our Color Guard Commander is Darren Schmidt. Color Guard Commander, advance the colors.
Color Guard, other hand, come. Shoulder, fire lines, carry, colors. Forward, march.
I will now call upon compatriot John Thomas to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Present colors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Raise colors.
Thank you, John. I will now call upon compatriot Carl Loveland to lead us in the SAR pledge. The pledge is found in your program.
We, the descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, who by their sacrifices established the United States of America, reaffirm our faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic, and solemnly pledge ourselves to defend them against every foe.
Thank you, Carl. Color Guard Commander, post the colors.
Present firelocks. Post colors.
give a special thank you to the Color Guard Commander, Darren Schmidt, and all of our Color Guard members for participating today. How about a nice round of applause? Please be seated. I would now like to take this opportunity to invite some of our Lineage Society leaders to bring greetings. First, call upon Bernie Coggins, First Vice President of the Virginia Society of the American Revolution.
Good morning. I'm here to bring greetings on behalf of the Virginia Society, all 2,000 plus of us. And I want to thank the Fairfax Resolves chapter for this ceremony to commemorate these signers. I think we tend to forget this day and time that these guys, these men that signed this declaration had their names inscribed somewhere on a list that the British were going to eventually, had things turned out differently, were going to find, and they were going to put a necktie around them and stretch their necks. This was not an idle function. So I would ask all of you to reflect on that and to remember these brave men. Also, I want to deviate a minute, and I want to mention that we just had our Congress in Savannah, and I want to offer congratulations to the Fairfax Resolves chapter. It was voted, given the honor for the President's Cup for the best extra large chapter. If I get this right, Colonel James Wood was an honorable mention for the large chapters, and the Culpeper Minutemen were
outstanding for a medium-sized chapter. Also, Colonel William Grayson received some honors too. So, congratulations to all of you.
Now call upon Michael Weiler, Governor of Virginia Society, the Order of Founders and Patriots of America.
Good morning, and greetings from the Virginia Society of the Order of the Founders and Patriots of America. As we honor the memory of the true patriot George Mason, principal author of the Fairfax Resolves. And neither George Mason's story nor the story of America began with Fairfax Resolves and the Revolution. George Mason's story began more than a century and a half before the Revolution. Our George Mason we honor today was actually the fourth George Mason in America. So who was the first George Mason? He was a soldier in the English Civil War who took up arms against the British Parliament. The army of which he was a part was defeated by the pro-Parliament forces. His life being in danger, he emigrated to Virginia in 1652. Where as a founder, he established a new life and a legacy for his descendants. We can see that defiance for the British Parliament was passed down from George Mason, the founder, to his great-grandson, George Mason, the patriot. Today we can honor both the founder and the patriot for their defiance of the British Parliament as reflected in the Fairfax Resolves. Thank you.
In 1774, after Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, that punished Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party, the Virginia House of Burgesses proclaimed that on June 1, 1774, it would be a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer as a show of solidarity with Boston. In response, Lord Dunmore, the Royal Governor of Virginia, dissolved the House of Burgesses. The Burgesses reconvened at Raleigh Tavern on May 27th and called for Virginia's counties to elect delegates to a special convention to meet in August. George Washington and Charles Broadwater were selected as Fairfax County's representatives to the convention. On July 5th, 1774, Washington and others from Fairfax County met in Alexandria, Virginia, to appoint the Fairfax County Committee of Safety and to draft a statement that would, as Washington described it, define our constitutional rights. The statement would also formally serve as instructions to Fairfax County's delegates to the Virginia Convention. The committee wrote a draft that was in all likelihood primarily the work of George Mason. Mason and Washington met at Mount Vernon on July 17th and perhaps revised the resolutions. The following day, on 18 July 1774, in Alexandria, the Fairfax Resolves were endorsed in a meeting of freeholders chaired by Washington. In the resolves, the freeholders expressed a desire to remain subjects of the British Empire, but they insisted, "We will use every means by which heaven hath given us to prevent our becoming its slaves." The short document provided the following: a concise summary of American constitutional concerns on such issues as taxation, representation, judicial power, military matters, and the colonial economy. A proposal for the creation of a non-importation effort to be levied against British goods. A call for a General Congress of the Colonies to convene for the purpose of preserving the Americans' rights as Englishmen. And a call for the termination of the slave trade, condemning the practice as wicked, cruel, and unnatural. The resolves directed Washington and Broadwater to present the resolutions to the Virginia Convention. The Fairfax Resolves, like many other similar resolutions adopted in county meetings throughout the colonies, summarized the feelings of many colonists in mid-1774. A conviction that their constitutional rights were being violated by British policies. The resolves also marked a step forward in intercolonial cooperation as more Americans began to realize that a threat against one colony was a threat against them all. For your reference, a copy of the Fairfax Resolves is provided and displayed in each of the pews. We are gathered here today in historic Pohick Church, which was built in 1774, the same year the Fairfax Resolves were signed. Pohick was the home church of George Washington and George Mason. Reverend Lee Massey was rector, having been ordained in 1766. All three were signers of the Fairfax Resolves. Washington presided over meetings at which the resolves were signed, and Mason was the primary author. Reverend Massey was a signer. We will now hear a first-person accounts from George Washington and Reverend Lee Massey. I am first honored to present to you Chairman of the Fairfax County Committee of Safety, His Excellency General George Washington.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor for me to be with you today. I am back home, where I belong. Thank you for allowing me to look around, because it's truly an amazing place, and I can see why you love it. I truly can. I can see why Virginians are so proud to be Virginians. Well, I would say my first rebellion did not happen in 1774. My first rebellion actually occurred in 1754, 20 years before the Fairfax Resolves. At that time, I was a major in the French and Indian War. And at that time, Governor Dinwiddie gave me the promotion as major. Well, I loved that promotion, and I respected Governor Dinwiddie without any hesitation. He was a good man. But when I found out that the pay that I was receiving was not equivalent to the British, I was quite upset. That did not do me well. And I remember that I went to Governor Dinwiddie with my concerns. It did no good. It was like if I were talking to the wall. The next problem that I had was with, what was that? It's been so long. Oh yes, my rank. My rank, major. I ended up as Lieutenant Colonel Washington, and I had much respect. But those who were British, who were lieutenant colonels or majors, who were the same rank as I, could tell me what to do. How was that possible? That is not good. And that was the second thing that bothered me throughout those times. And then the land that was promised to me in 1763 at the end of the French and Indian War, they rescinded. I could not believe my feelings were hurt because I counted on that land. But then they eventually changed their minds. Yes, they did. I left the French and Indian War early because it was not fair to me. It was not fair to the colonists who were fighting. And then on January 6th, 1759, I married my beautiful Mrs. Custis, who ended up being my wife. I never called my wife Martha, I always called her Patsy. She was wonderful and I loved her dearly. But she was very rich. And they always said that Washington's always married up in life. Well, I guess that was true. But that was not the reason at the time. When I met her in Williamsburg at the Chamberlain House, I remember walking into the room of Mr. Chamberlain because he invited us, or me, to dinner before we were married. And she was there with her two little children, and I fell in love with them too, almost immediately. But that's another story. When I married my dear Martha, or Patsy, she was wealthy and we were living at Mount Vernon. And I was fixing up the house. Our home was beautiful. But when I would deal with the British mercantile system, that was a problem. Robert Carey was in charge of the British mercantile system, and whenever I would deal with him, I felt that he would inflate the prices that I was buying my clothes, nails. The nails were always brittle. All of the products that I ordered from, I shouldn't say all, but most of the products that I ordered from England were inferior. And I always thought they thought I was a second-class citizen. That's why they did not give me quality materials. I always felt that he inflated the price and the invoices, and I told him of that. And all of those things that happened made my blood boil. You did not disrespect me. or we should not disrespect anyone. But he did. And all of those happenings during or before the Resolves, they were my first part of my personal revolution. The Fairfax Resolves, July 18th, 74. The resolution rejected Parliament's claim of supreme authority over the colonies. Now you have to remember, everyone, we were already here 150 years before the Revolutionary War started. 150 years that we were here, we were self-governed. We like it that way. We were fine. And I always said that I understood why the British were doing what they were doing, but I didn't like the method they were using. That was a real problem. After the Tea Party, Parliament passed the Coercive Act and the Intolerable Act. Yes, and they also closed the port, which stranglehold those good Boston people who are real patriots. And I also remember there was another Tea Party. But as you know, it was not called the Boston Tea Party at that time. It was called the Destruction of the Teas. And not until later on that name changed. For support of Boston, the House of Burgesses proclaimed June 1st, 1774 would be a day of prayer, fasting, humiliation, and prayer. At the time, 30 different counties here in Virginia passed similar resolutions, but the Fairfax County was more detailed, more influential, and more radical. In the Resolves, we expressed our desire to remain subjects of the British Empire. We did not want to leave, and before that time, I was somewhat in the middle of the road. I didn't know which way to go. But there was a tipping point for me, which made everything real. And it made my blood boil, as I said before. We had 24 concerns about taxes, representation, and 24 in all. That was what the Resolves were all about. But most importantly was the condemnation of importing slaves into Virginia. It was a wicked, a cruel, and unnatural trade. Its termination was urged. And I remember the night that Mr. Mason came to my house on the 17th, and we went over the Resolves. And the next day, on the 18th, they were passed. All this led up to the Declaration of Independence. All those men who signed the Declaration of Independence knew exactly what they were doing, because by signing the Declaration of Independence, 56 Americans pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. It was no idle pledge. 9 signers died of wounds during the Revolution. 5 were captured or imprisoned. Wives and children were killed, jailed, mistreated, or left penniless. 12 signers' homes were burned to the ground. 17 lost everything they owned. No signer defected. Their honor as their nation remained intact. We were all Virginians in here, all of us. We are proud of the Fairfax Resolves. I know I am. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chairman General Washington. Ordained in 1766 by the Bishop of London, Reverend Lee Massey became rector of Pohick Church in 1767. He was rector when the new Pohick Church was completed at this location in 1774 and remained so until 1777. Reverend Massey is interred here under the pulpit. He too was a signer of the Fairfax Resolves, and we are fortunate to have Reverend Lee Massey with us today.
Many of us in the colony of Virginia have long regarded Massachusetts as the home of sharp Yankee traders, sanctimonious religious zealots, and intemperate political radicals. Those so-called Sons of Liberty of Boston have long appeared to be far more interested in rum, riot, and rebellion than in calm diplomacy and steady debate when dealing with authority. I was, until recently, also of this mind that the radicals of Boston would call down punishments upon their own heads by such continued rash and intemperate counsel. But I will now freely admit that my own perceptions were changed this year when the British Parliament began imposing the Boston Port Act as punishment for that most infamous Tea Party. For I believe that the punishment far exceeds the crime and penalizes thousands of innocent residents, as General Washington mentioned, the women, children, the poor, the infirm, and it violates their rights as British subjects. As the Port of Boston is a major source of supplies for the entire colony of Massachusetts and their citizens, its continued closure calls for our sympathetic support and temporal relief to those in need by virtue of Christian charity. And as Colonel Mason and General Washington have laid out so eloquently in these resolutions, we would agree that the time has come for mutual aid and the reliance of our various colonies into one common cause. I find myself in agreement with a statement recently made by Dr. Benjamin Franklin, that now begins a time when we should no longer refer to ourselves as Virginians or Pennsylvanians or Marylanders, but as Americans. Now I know there are still those here and in Virginia, those who say that this is not yet the time to extend ourselves in aiding far-off Massachusetts for their own sins, and that Christian heroics are neither warranted nor required. In response to that premise, may I advance this proposition. If we lived in a state where virtue was profitable, common sense would make us good, and greed would make us saintly. But since in fact we see that avarice, anger, envy, sloth, pride, lust, and stupidity commonly profit far beyond humility, chastity, fortitude, justice, and thought, why then perhaps we must stand fast a little, and even at the risk of being heroes. So let us join together, not as separate, disinterested colonists, but as Americans. And may God help and strengthen us all in the pursuit of these resolutions. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. We are here today to honor and remember the signers of the Fairfax Resolves. According to an article about the Fairfax County Committee of Safety, published in the DAR magazine more than 100 years ago, it stated, the individual members of the Fairfax County Committee of Safety were clearly among the strong men of the period. The members of the committee of this county were as able as those of any other committee, and they contributed a greater share to the making of the nation than did any other county in the colonies. Let us remember these men today, the signers of the Fairfax Resolves, as we read their names. Robert Adam, Charles Alexander, Philip Alexander, Charles Broadwater, William Brown, John Carlisle, Martin Cockburn, Reverend Townsend Dade Jr., John Dalton, George Gilpin, Henry Gunnell, Robert Hanson Harrison, William Hartshorn, James Kirk, Thomas Lewis, George Mason, Reverend Lee Massey, Edward Payne, William Payne, Thomas Pollard, William Ramsey, William Rumney, Thomas Triplett, George Washington, and John West. I will now call upon compatriot Carl Loveland to read the Fairfax Resolve proclamation from the city of Fairfax.
Proclamation. Whereas the Fairfax Resolves were signed by 20 patriots from Fairfax County, Virginia, 246 years ago on July 18, 1774, including George Washington and George Mason. And whereas George Mason was the primary author of the Fairfax Resolves, which were written in response to the British Coercive Acts of 1774. And whereas the Fairfax Resolves were an assertion of the rights of the colonies and a first step forward in cooperation between the colonies with support for a general Congress, and whereas the fundamental principle in the Fairfax Resolves was the people should be governed by no laws to which they have not given their consent by representatives freely chosen by themselves, and that taxation and representation were in the nature inseparable as the basis of a free people. And whereas the Fairfax Resolves called for a non-importation protest against British goods, which was supported by the Virginia Convention and adopted by the First Continental Congress in October 1774. To pressure Great Britain into redressing the grievances of the colonies and repealing the coercive acts. And whereas more than 30 counties in the colony of Virginia passed similar resolutions in 1774, but the Fairfax Resolves was considered the most detailed and influential. Now, therefore, that I, David L. Mayer, Mayor of City of Fairfax, hereby declare July 18th Fairfax Resolves Day in the city of Fairfax, Virginia, and encourage all citizens to become knowledgeable of the significance of the resolves and the important impact of the events leading to our nation's independence, as well as the foundation of the liberties later included in the Constitution of the United States of America, and which had served as a model and source of hope for many more than 2 centuries for ensuring the human rights and liberties of all persons throughout the world. Done this 23rd day of July, 2022, David Mayer, Mayor.
Thank you, Carl. The 250th anniversary program of the Sons of the American Revolution is intended to promote activities which publicly educate, honor, and celebrate the events and heroes of the years preceding the Revolutionary War through the Treaty of Paris. In support of that program, the Fairfax Resolves chapter established the 1774 Society in the fall of 2018 with a charge to educate the public about the Fairfax Resolves, mark the graves of signers, and commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Resolves in 2024. I now call upon compatriot Ken Bonner, a signer member of the 1774 Society, to discuss the 1774 Society program.
I wanted to take just a moment to thank the members of the 1774 Society for their support of this commemoration and our ongoing efforts to mark the graves of all signers of the Fairfax Resolves. This effort is part of the 250th anniversary of the Fairfax Resolves, which we will celebrate in just 2 years. Today we are marking 4 signers who are interned here at Pohick Church. We have marked 2 other signers earlier this year. Our next marking will take place in the fall at the Old Presbyterian Meeting House in Old Town Alexandria, where we will honor signer John Carlisle. I would encourage everyone taking part in this event today to join the 1774 Society and support this ongoing mission. You do not need to be a member of the Fairfax Resolves chapter to join us. All you have to do is be willing to support the ongoing efforts to honor these patriot signers. Today, we would like to recognize a few new members of the 1774 Society. The first person we would like to recognize is Virginia Society's first Vice President, Ernie Coggins, for his support at the delegate level. Ernie, please come forward to receive your 1774 Society Mason Medal. Congratulations and thank you for your support of the Society.
Glad to do it. Appreciate it. Over here. We're gonna break the camera.
Thank you, sir. You did fine. Great. In addition, we would like to recognize 3 individuals for their support of this annual commemoration. We are presenting these individuals with honorary membership in the 1774 Society for their interpretations of the signers, the Reverend Lee Massey, George Mason, and George Washington. Their support of this event has made a significant contribution to the mission of the 1774 Society. I would ask Reverend Tom Costa and Sam Davis if they would come forward at this time to receive your honorary membership certificate and 1774 Society lapel pin. Don McAndrews could not be with us today. We will recognize him at another time. Please. Thank you, Ken. Absolutely. Thank you. Hang on. Sam, one moment. But wait, there's more. This is a lapel pin designating you as a member of the 1774 Society.
Oh, thank you.
With our grateful appreciation for your support of this.
Of course.
Worthy societies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ken.
You bet. Tom, likewise. George,
You have to
this is
stay up for
lapel
another
pin
picture.
for your support of our society's efforts.
Thank you.
You bet. David?
Ken. We'll now move to the dedication of the grave markers in honor of the 4 Patriot signers of the Fairfax Resolves who are interred here at Pohick Church. Charles Alexander, William Brown, Reverend Lee Massey, and John West IV. First, I call upon compatriot Dave Cook to tell us about Charles Alexander.
Charles Alexander of Preston was born to John and Pearson Alexander on 20 July 1737 in St. Paul's Parish, Stafford, now King George County, Virginia. Charles married Frances Brown, daughter of the Reverend Richard and Helen Bailey Brown in 1771. In early 1770s, Charles Alexander brought suit to resolve a long-lasting land dispute between the house and patent, which was 6,000 acres, which had been granted to the Alexander family, and grants issued by Charles II by the Northern Neck proprietor, known as the Northern Neck proprietorship, and land controlled at that time by the Fairfax family. This suit was finally settled in 1790 in favor of the Alexander. The court decided that 60 years of ownership before the land grant to Lord Fairfax was enough to give them title. Charles Alexander, besides signing the Fairfax Resolves, was appointed a member of the Fairfax County Committee of Safety, and he also provided provisions to the Virginia militia in 1777. Charles was first appointed as vestryman of Christ Church on 21 August 1777. He served as the church warden between 1778 and 1780, and then again in 1782. Charles Alexander was a Fairfax Commissioner of State Aid in 1780 and President of the Fairfax Board of Overseers of the Poor in 1797. Charles Alexander died on the 5th of April, 1806, and his wife, Frances, died on the 7th of November, 1823. They had 7 children.
Thank you, Dave. Next, I call upon compatriot Jim Cordes, who will tell us about William Brown.
William Brown was born into the Maryland gentry. His father was the Reverend Richard Gustavus Brown of Port Tobacco, Maryland. His tombstone indicates his birth to be in the year 1748 or 1749. According to the book Medical Men in the American Revolution, he was born in 1752 when the family was visiting relatives in Pennington, Scotland. He studied at the University of Edinburgh, where he was awarded his MD in 1770. Later, he married Catherine Scott, daughter of the Reverend James Scott. William Brown was active in resistance to British tyranny before the outbreak of war. In 1774, he was a member of the Fairfax County Committee for Safety. The date he began his service in the Army is not known. However, it was by 9 December 1775 when Colonel William Woodford, commanding the 2nd Virginia Regiment, wrote from Great Bridge to the President of the Virginia Convention at Williamsburg. He said, "We are now under arms expecting another attack. Please forward Dr. Brown's chest of medicines and baggage down." William Brown continued as surgeon of the 2nd Virginia Regiment into 1776, when he became assistant surgeon of the flying camp. He was appointed Surgeon General of the hospital, Middle Department, 13 May 1777. He continued in this capacity until 6 February 1778, when he was appointed physician and Director General of Hospital. In 1778, he released the first pharmacopoeia published in the United States, titled Formulary of Simple Yet Efficacious Remedies. This work explained 84 internal medications and 16 surgical or external medications, and was undoubtedly used by many military surgeons who did not have the advantage of university training. William Brown resigned from the Army 21 July 1780. The Continental Congress took note of his departure from service thusly. Resolved that Congress entertains a high opinion of the ability, integrity, and past services of Dr. William Brown, Physician General, but as circumstances will no longer permit his continuance in the service, his resignation is accepted. After the Revolution, William Brown was active in the Alexandria community, and in 1782 was elected vestryman of Christ Church. He purchased portions of lots 65 and 66 at Prince and Fairfax Streets in 1783. When Alexandria was laid out, lots were half a block. He was the president of the trustees of the Alexandria Academy and secured George Washington's support for that institution. He was physician of the St. Andrew Society and an original member of the Society of Cincinnati. William Brown died 11 January 1792. According to his tombstone, he was 44. He was laid to rest at Preston Plantation at the mouth of 4 Mile Run. Preston was the seat of Charles Alexander and Frances was his sister. In 1933, the bodies of Preston were reinterred at Pohick Church. Brown was discovered to have been buried in his Continental uniform, with a ribbon of some order on the breast of his uniform. The epitaph on the tombstone speaks well of him and says, "This tablet is inscribed by his affectionate widow."
Thank you, Jim. I now call upon compatriot Larry McKinley to tell us about Reverend Lee Massey.
Reverend Lee Massey, 22 September 1732 to 23 September 1814. Lee Massey was born the 22nd of September as son of David Massey and Parthena Alexander of Stafford County, Virginia. By the 1760s, he was a resident of Fairfax County and a practicing attorney. He became increasingly concerned with religious matters. In the mid-1760s, when Truro Parish was in need of a rector, he was encouraged by the congregation to seek ordination. He was ordained in 1766 by the Bishop of London and became the second rector of Truro Parish in 1767. His parishioners included George Washington and George Mason. As the Revolution approached, Lee Massey found himself playing a significant role mustering local support for the colonies. When the Boston Trade Act became known in Virginia, the House of Burgesses passed a resolution to set 1 June, the effective date of the act, as a day of fasting. 2 days later, 26 May 1774, George Mason wrote to Martin Cockburn, "Mr. Massey will receive a copy of the resolve from Colonel Washington, and should a day of prayer and fasting be appointed in our county, please tell my dear little family that I charge them to pay strict attention to it, and that I desire my 3 eldest sons and my 2 eldest daughters may attend church in the morning, if they have it, as I believe they have." Lee Massey, as rector of the parish, would have prepared a sermon suitable for the occasion. Governor Dunmore reacted to the resolution by dissolving the House of Burgesses later, May 26th. George Mason returned home to Gunston Hall. Now, Fairfax County was now on a path leading to revolution. George
Mason drafted 24 resolutions to present to the freeholders of the county. The freeholders met 18 June 1774, added 2 resolutions, and passed the Fairfax Resolve. The 25th Resolve created a committee of 25 who would have had the power to take appropriate action in case of emergency. Lee Massey was one of the 25. George Mason provides us with an assessment of Massey's ability and character. In 1789, Mason renewed an effort to have Massey appointed to be a judge of the General Court. Mason wrote of Massey, "This gentleman was bred to the law, and in my judgment, there are few abler men in point of legal knowledge in the state. He is a man of firm mind and independent principle and unsustained integrity, such as I am confident would do honor to the bench. I well know the importance of the office of the judge to the good people of this Commonwealth and can, with a safe conscience, recommend Mr. Lee Massey as a person qualified to discharge this arduous and important trust. I have been intimately acquainted with him from a very early time of life, have had the means of knowing him thoroughly, and would risk my life upon his integrity and abilities." Lee Massey died 23 September 1814. He was buried at the family cemetery at his plantation Bradley on the Occoquan River, about 5 miles from Pohick Episcopal Church. In 1908, he and his third wife, Elizabeth Ronald, were reinterred here. The Reverend Massey was buried inside the church under the pulpit.
Thank you, Larry. Finally, I call upon compatriot Sam Huxall to tell us about John West IV.
Colonel John West IV was born about 1710 as the son of Major John West III and his second wife, Elizabeth Sem Turley West Broadwater. His mother had previously been married to John Turley, and following his death, she married Major John West III. Following Major John West III's death in 1716, she married Charles Broadwater. It was from Elizabeth Sem's marriage to Charles Broadwater that Colonel Charles Broadwater was born. Thus, Colonel John West IV and Colonel Charles Broadwater were half-brothers and both signers of the Fairfax Resolves. Colonel John West lived on the south side of Hunting Creek near the Potomac River, his house being about 2 miles by water and 4 by road from Alexandria. He succeeded his brother, Hugh West, as Fairfax County Burgess soon after Hugh's death in 1754 and served in the House until 1774. He was a Fairfax County Justice from 1745 to 1777 and a benchman from 1744 to 1765 for Truro Parish, and after 1765 for Fairfax Parish. Between 1755 and 1774, he served as a Burgess representing Fairfax County. In 1774, Colonel John West was among the Fairfax County freeholders who helped draft and sign the Fairfax Resolves. Later that year, he stepped down from his position as Burgess due to ill health and died on February 18, 1777. He was probably buried in the family vault at West Grove's Plantation Cemetery just south of Great Hunting Creek, and later reinterred at Pohick Church Cemetery. He married twice, having 4 daughters with his first wife, Mary Harris, and a son and a daughter with his second wife, Margaret Pearson. Colonel John West IV had a nephew called John West Jr., but because they lived in the same general neighborhood and died only a few months apart, the two men are often confused with one another. In his diaries, George Washington distinguishes them by referring to the elder John West as Colonel, apparently a militia title, and his nephew as Mr. or Captain John West. The title of captain may have also been a militia designation, or may have perhaps been derived from an earlier involvement in merchant shipping.
Thank you, Sam. We now come to the part of our ceremony where we dedicate the grave markers. I ask that compatriots Dave Cook and Larry McKinley read the marker dedication.
If the past is indeed prologue, then a glimpse into the past can provide a source of wisdom and inspiration for the future. As we honor those patriots today, let us be mindful of their service to our nation, and let us rededicate ourselves to the principles for which they held sacred.
As we gather, O God, for this dedication today, we ask your blessing upon each one of us. We thank you for this occasion as we honor the memory of our patriots. We esteem their patriotism, encourage their faith and loyalty, and their willingness to sacrifice to make our world a better place. We thank you, too, for America and all patriots who have given us the liberties and privileges that we enjoy. May we be willing to serve you and our nation as they did. May the ideals that we remember from the past sustain us today and safeguard us tomorrow.
We, the members of the Sons of the American Revolution, dedicate these markers to the glory of God in recognition of the memory of Charles Alexander, William Brown, the Reverend Lee Massey, and John West IV, patriots of the American Revolution.
Almighty God, as we go from this place today, remind all who pass by of the devotion and dedication of all who have made our nation great. May all be humbled and encouraged by these markers to esteem and perpetuate these virtues with our lives. May the peace of God, which surpasses all, guard our hearts and minds in the ties of friendship and unity of love. Amen.
Please unveil the marker for Reverend Lee Massey. Thank you, Jill. We will now move to the wreath presentation of the ceremony, and I call upon compatriot John Thomas to come forward to conduct the wreath presentation.
All right, I'd like to present the wreath presentations. Sons of the American Revolution, Virginia Society, Bernie Coggins, First Vice President. There should be room for us to stand behind. Fairfax Resolves, David Huxell, President. George Washington Society, Richard Rankin, President. George Mason Society, Ken Norris, past president. Colonel William Grayson Society, Charles Mills, historian. Colonel James Woods II, Sean Kerrigan, compatriot. Sergeant Major John Chan, Society, Kenneth Bonner, president. Sergeant Lawrence Everhart and Lee Edward Spanish. From the Daughters of the American Revolution, Fairfax County, Elizabeth A. Honorary Regent. Lane Mill, Anita Bonner, compatriot. Elizabeth McIntosh Howell, Paula Shore, compatriot. From the Order of the Founders and Patriots of America, the Virginia Society, Mike Wiley, Governor. Are there any other wreaths that need to be presented? If so, please do so now. We're going to now allow time for photographs. Thank you, presenters. You may now be seated.
Thank you, John. We would now like to give special thanks to the following participants by presenting them with some certificates of appreciation. As I call your name, please step forward. Sandra Cesar, Kara Font, Clint Herbert, like to read this briefly. It says, on behalf of the Fairfax Resolves chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, this certificate of appreciation is awarded to Sandra Cesar for the tremendous support for the 248th commemoration of the signing of the Fairfax Resolves and dedication ceremony. We are very grateful for your tremendous help in coordinating the placement of the Patriot grave markers at the Pohick Episcopal Cemetery of the four signers of the Fairfax Resolves, and appreciate the time and effort you devoted to making this a very successful and memorable occasion, and hereby present you with a certificate of appreciation. So, thanks. Next, if you could please have Mr. Sam Davis and Reverend Costa come forward. Reverend Costa, on behalf of the Fairfax Resolves chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, this certificate of appreciation is awarded to the Reverend Dr. Tom Costa for the tremendous support for the 248th commemoration of the signing of the Fairfax Resolves and dedication ceremony. Your portrayal of Reverend Lee Massey was truly